A reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 1 through 15. Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already decided that Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, would betray Jesus. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from supper, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who is bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had reclined again, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you."
Several weeks ago, 12 women inmates at a medium security prison on the outskirts of Rome were ushered into an outdoor tent to meet an 87-year-old wheelchair-bound visitor. The inmates, imprisoned for various offenses, were from all over the world: Italy, Bulgaria, Nigeria, Ukraine, Peru, Venezuela, even Bosnia-Herzegovina. From his wheelchair, this slumped-over elderly visitor addressed the 12 inmates along with a 3-year-old boy who lives at the prison with his mother. And the visitor said that all of us have small and big failures, that everyone has their own story, but that God's arms are always open and God never tires of forgiving. And then he bent down before each inmate and washed and dried their feet one by one. Since his election to the papacy in 2013, Pope Francis has traveled to a prison, refugee center, or youth detention facility every Holy Thursday to wash the feet of the least and the lost, commemorating Jesus' act of washing the feet of his disciples on his last night on earth. This peculiar act of foot washing is a poignant reminder of the radical, unconditional, even outrageous love Jesus calls us to practice in this world. It's an odd ritual for us moderns, isn't it? Foot washing, really? Unless we're sitting in a bougie spa or nail bar sipping mimosas while someone goes to town on our heel calluses with a pumice stone or a foot file, most of us do not want anyone touching our feet. This is probably why foot washing never became a sacrament in the church like communion. I mean, people will gladly show up to church for bread and wine, but if you want to quickly clear out a church, just ask the people to take off their shoes for some sudsy foot-handling Tootsie Tickle time in the name of Jesus. Our feet are just off limits in church. Our calluses, bunions, corns, hammer toes, warts, and knobs are best kept to ourselves. If your feet are dirty, you know how to wash them. You don't need my help. To expose our feet, to have them touched by a stranger, even in church where we all mostly kind of love each other, that's super awkward and like a really tacky idea. So what was Jesus thinking when he said, "If your Lord and teacher, me, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet"? It all happened the night before Passover, on the last night of Jesus' life. He knows he's going to die soon. The only question is when and how, and what else must he teach his disciples before it happens. So he gets everyone together for what turns out to be literally his Last Supper. They're all there, his 12 disciples, probably Mary Magdalene and Mary, his mother, maybe even Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha. The atmosphere is thick with tension and uncertainty. No one speaks a word as they pass the bread and the common cup of wine around that table. And then unexpectedly, Jesus stands up and he takes off his outer garment. He picks up a basin of water and a towel and does the most bewildering thing, kneeling before each of them, washing their feet and drying them with a towel. In the first century world, it's a slave's job to wash feet. A slave's job. Foot washing is how a host shows basic hospitality to his guests. Before entering, you remove your sandals, and then a slave washes and dries your feet. And if your host has no slave, there's a basin and towel by the door for guests to wash their own feet. Foot washing was this ancient Near Eastern rite of hospitality, but it was never some hyper-spiritualized meaning behind it. Nobody considered foot washing as some profoundly religious experience in which they'd encountered the divine. Foot washing was mostly just a practical custom. It was probably a polite way of saying, "Welcome to my home. Now please kindly wash those repulsive paws before you make a mess of my place." But Jesus transformed this practical custom into a beautiful expression of love. Jesus here is the host of this meal, but he washes the feet of his guests like a servant. Jesus does a slave's job, breaking the honor code, the socially, culturally, religiously enforced rules that maintain all the lines of power and hierarchy and social boundaries. Jesus subverts the norms so that the host does the work of the servant and the master behaves like a slave. Everything is wrong here with this picture, and they're all speechless except for Peter, who says, "Nope, you shouldn't be doing this for me, Jesus." And Peter is just always saying what everyone else is thinking. But Jesus says, "Peter, this is who I am, and this is what I've come to do. From now on, you must do likewise. Love one another as I've loved you. And never forget what I have done this night." This command is the central teaching of John's Gospel. In John's Gospel, there is no Holy Communion. There's no reference in John's Gospel to the broken bread as Christ's body or the cup as Christ's blood. There's no ethical imperative in John's Gospel like turn the other cheek or walk a second mile or even pray for your enemies. In John's Gospel, there's only this act of washing feet and the commandment to love. "I have set for you," he says, "an example that you should do as I have done." For us moderns, foot washing really is more of a metaphor, a symbol for all the ways we are called in deep humility to express love and generosity in service to others. How do we fulfill that commandment? Maybe it first starts not with going out and washing the feet of others, as Jesus does, but actually by daring first to be like those disciples in the story and allowing our feet to be washed. Most of us, if given the choice between actually washing the feet of others or having somebody wash our feet, would hands down choose the former. It's better to give than to receive. It always feels better to serve than to be served. Maybe that's a power dynamic thing. Whenever we do something for others, it feels empowering for us, but it also tends to create this imbalance of power between us and the other that can sometimes reinforce feelings of superiority or control. Has anyone ever invited you over for dinner, and then in the back of your mind, you're thinking that you now must reciprocate, like maybe you owe them one now? Has anyone ever unexpectedly given you a Christmas gift, for example, when you didn't have a gift to offer them in return, and now it's too late and you wonder what you can do to make it up to them? We assume that love must always be reciprocal. But reciprocity is often a barrier to expressing or feeling true, unconditional, no strings attached kind of love. I remember something Bono of U2 once said in an interview years ago. Asked about his faith, he said, "The thing that keeps me on my knees is the difference between grace and karma." He said the center of all religions is this idea of karma, that what you put out comes back to you. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, or in physics, every action is met by an equal and opposite one. Karma, he said, is at the very heart of the universe. And yet along comes this idea called grace, to upend all that as you reap, so you will sow kind of stuff. Grace, he said, defies reason and logic. Love interrupts the consequences of our actions, which Bono said, in my case, is a very good news indeed, because I've done a lot of stupid stuff. Grace is just another word for what we call God's love. And it interrupts not only the consequences of our actions, but our compulsion toward reciprocity. Divine love cannot be reciprocated. The moment we try to reciprocate that divine love by sacrificing for God or by achieving something good or worthy for God, as a way of trying to balance the books, that love just becomes transactional, not transformational. What Jesus does in the washing of his disciples' feet is an act of grace that breaks the transactional impulses that govern our lives. It's like he's saying, I'm doing this for you, expecting nothing in return, so just receive. You remember that beautiful film years ago called Precious? About Clarice Precious Jones, a lonely, abused Harlem teenager. In the film, Precious is pregnant as a result of having been assaulted by her mother's boyfriend, who is also her father. She's been abused since childhood, and because of her obesity, she's rejected by almost everyone. Her world is dark, bereft of kindness, utterly loveless. Expelled from school because she's pregnant a second time, she ends up at a special school with an extraordinary teacher and a social worker who slowly, patiently draws her out. The teacher has her students journal about their lives, but Precious can't write about herself. The only words she can write in her journal are, "Why me?" The teacher persists. Whatever it is, she says, it's important. But that same day, Precious had just learned that she's HIV positive, and she's at the end of her rope. And she breaks down and weeps, totally devoid of self-worth. And she says, nobody loves me. Nobody has ever loved me. And that teacher kneels at her desk, like Jesus kneeling at the feet of his friends, and says, that is not true. Your baby loves you. I love you. And this miracle happens. Life slowly, steadily returns. Love creates a future. Peter tells Jesus, I can't let you wash my feet. But Jesus says to Peter, if I can't wash your feet, you can't be a part of what I'm doing. If you can't experience the depth of this love I have for you, you'll never be able to love others as I've loved you. We can only truly love others when we have been loved without reciprocation. Only unmerited, undeserved, unreciprocated love can change the world. And so the first step in fulfilling the commandment of Jesus to go and do like him is to stop trying to reciprocate and just receive the love that's given to us by God. And the second step is to love others without the expectation of reciprocation. to give away grace freely, apart from any transaction, free of any judgments about the worthiness of others. This is extraordinarily difficult to do because most of us walk around with these preconceived notions or prejudgments about people. But the 4th century theologian Augustine gives us some advice on how to love others. Augustine said that Jesus loved each person he met as if there were none other in all the world to love. In other words, Jesus radically individualized the love he displayed toward others. Jesus focused on the particular and the unique in every human being. He paid attention. Instead of lumping people together in categories and classes according to labels, he paid attention to the uniqueness of each person. And so a person wasn't just a Pharisee or a tax collector or a prostitute or a leper. To Jesus, each was a real person with a real name and a face and a story. Have you ever heard someone say, if you've met one of them, you've met them all? One liberal or conservative, one millennial or baby boomer, one lawyer, preacher, immigrant, addict, or homeless person. They're all the same, right? No, but they're all real humans with real names and real stories, with real and particular needs. And so we see them in their particularity, like Jesus, who washes even the feet of Peter, whom we know will soon deny him before the night's even over. But Augustine also said that even as Jesus loved each person for who they were, Jesus loved everyone as he loved each. The way he loved was not only individualized, it was remarkably universal. There were no groups of people whom he considered deserving and undeserving or outside the circle of God's love, not even his enemies, not even his executioners. This is hard for us because we all like our tribes. We like people who wear the same jersey we're wearing. But Jesus loved those whom others assumed were on the opposing team. Samaritans, tax collectors, Gentiles, even the Romans. Jesus loved all as he loved each. And it was that love that built bridges instead of walls and brought reconciliation wherever there were divisions. And isn't that a lesson on how to really love others in the midst of so much political and social and even theological division today? Years ago, in the first church I served, there was this wonderful family whom I cared deeply about. They had a deeply evangelical background, which is why I was a bit surprised they found our church, and even more surprised that they soon thereafter became members. They were drawn to our outreach and service ministries for the poor and homeless. They were deeply committed to the church and to me as their pastor. But when a same-sex couple, along with their 2 children, started attending our church, things got kind of complicated for them. We were inclusive in our welcome and unequivocal in our embrace of this new family. This was back in the mid-1990s. It created some controversy, especially for this more conservative family whom I deeply cared about, who began publicly expressing their own confusion about what they thought the Bible said on the issue of homosexuality and whether and even why the church should be inclusive. And it seemed certain to me that they would leave the church over this issue. And when they eventually scheduled this appointment to come to my office to discuss the matter, I spent the next few days just praying for grace and understanding and preparing myself for what I expected to be a hard conversation that would end painfully for everyone. But on the afternoon of that appointment, as they walked into my office, she was carrying a bucket of water. He was carrying a towel. And before I could put two and two together, they had each knelt at my feet. And they asked me to remove my shoes and socks, and I was speechless. And every impulse within me was saying, no, not this, not now. Get up and tell them that this isn't necessary, and that we could just talk it through and hear each other out and reach some kind of friendly agreement here and not do this strange and awkward and beautiful and intimate and deeply moving Jesus-y foot washing thing. But their faces shone with a purity of love and kindness and grace. And so in silence, I removed my shoes and socks. And she washed my feet in the warm, fragrant water. And he followed with a towel, drying both heels and all 10 toes. And then rising to their feet, she said, "We'll see you Sunday." Jesus says it this way: I have set for you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. Our takeaways for today: Jesus loved each person he met as if there were none other in all the world to love. Jesus loved everyone as he loved each. Go and do likewise.